Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friends. It's your host, Janell Wood, and I'm so excited. We have a special guest here today, but before I introduce him, I'm also joined today by Anna. Anna, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you back here. And Anna, people haven't heard your story yet in detail, but I'm excited for them to get to know you more. I think that we may have touched on it in the last episode, but you worked with me last year, and I've just gotten to know you over the last few years. First as a teenager in high school ministry, and now seeing how God is using you in ministry in our valley in Chelan. And I'm just really grateful to have you in my life, and I'm grateful you get to be here for this conversation. Um, and before we introduce today's guest, you had asked specifically if we could invite this person back on the podcast, and not to put you on the spot, or maybe to put you on the spot a little bit, but do you remember why and what you were hoping we would talk about today?
Yeah. So like you said, I worked with you last year. So I listened to the podcast that would come out every episode or every week. And I remember Jason was one, I think around this time last year. Um, and I got to hear a little bit of his story. And as I was hearing his story, I was like, there's a lot of overlap with my story. So I just found a lot of similarities in the way that we grew up in, just some similar experiences, not exactly the same, but I just related a lot to his story. So yeah, I just thought it'd be a fun conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, so our guest today is Jason Schmidt. And Jason, before I tell people more about you, I'd love for you to just share about yourself. You've been on this podcast twice before. Um, I've known you since you were a very little baby, probably even before you were born. And so I'd love for you to share more about who you are.
Yeah. Um, Thanks for having me back. I'm currently out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I never knew, for anyone listening, I never knew Janelle personally when I was a baby, but she knew my family very well. Um, and were you there? I think I asked this last time I was on the podcast, but I honestly can't remember. Were you there for the little like Imperial Death March, whatever, down the aisle that my dad told me about? Were you there for that? Was that in Snohomish?
But I don't know. I,
It
you
sounds like
were
a crazy question. I guess I didn't answer. I guess I
No,
didn't
no.
ask the question
You
last
didn't
time.
ask me that. I was there during IYC, the flooding of '97, and you were a
Yes.
baby, and
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
pictures of a bunch of us holding you. So I knew
Yeah,
you, but you didn't know me. So
my dad told me a story of when I was born, they were in Snohomish at the time with the Snohomish youth group.
yeah.
And I guess like the first time they brought me to the youth group, a bunch of kids like lined the aisle on either side and they played the Imperial Death March, like from Star Wars, Just walked me down
Oh,
to see my little baby clothes.
wow. I don't
So that
remember
would
that,
have
but
been
probably, maybe it happened. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Well, that would have been when Janelle and my parents were in the same area. But grew up in Albuquerque because we moved not long after that. Bounced around for a while after that once I moved from Albuquerque. Um, and now I'm back. And I am working in a pastoral role at a church here with youth and young adults. And I coach a boys soccer team for a high school here in Albuquerque. Um, I'm in school and it's good. Balloon Fiesta is going on right now. The world's largest hot air balloon fiesta. In the
I have a friend that's
um,
going to that. That's so cool.
Actually, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, from here.
from up in Washington, and she's just visiting.
Yeah, but she wanted to go specifically for that. It's been on her bucket list for like ever.
It's kind of a like I know it's like the kind of most touristy thing about Albuquerque, but it's kind of a
Yeah,
once in a lifetime thing. Like you really, I don't think it can be overplayed or overrated. I really don't. It's kind of magical. It's kind of amazing. So
that's so
It,
cool.
this is my
it's
plug for anybody up in the Washington area to come down to Albuquerque. And if you do, hit me up and we'll go. It'd be cool.
well, anyone listening to this, really, I mean, beyond Washington.
Yeah.
You know what's weird though about that, Jason, is Snohomish was kind of known for its hot air balloons. Did you know that?
Really? No, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
that's funny. No, I had no
Your
idea.
mom could probably tell you about that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
anyway, small world. But that's maybe Anna, maybe we'll have to go down to the hot air balloon festival next time. I
That's
don't know.
fair.
Or we could
No,
just go.
honestly, you really should. I can't hype it up enough for people. It's truly like it is every year the most whimsical experience I've ever encountered. Every
Is
single
it
year. I
around the same time
never get tired of it.
every year?
What'd you say?
Is it around the same time every year?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
always around the beginning of October. It might even be the first week of October every year, I think.
Okay. Well, that's a good plug. Maybe Albuquerque is worth visiting in October for that reason.
Yes,
Now,
ma'am.
I know you kind of brushed over it, Jason, but you're in school for something very specific. What are you going to school for?
I'm currently getting a master's in theological studies, and it's just gonna help me in this, you know, in this path in pastoral ministry. And I've already loved it. It's fascinating. It's cool. I'm doing it through Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. They used to be out of Chicago, so I'm doing it entirely online. But they actually recently moved, and they're now affiliated with Trinity Western, up close to you guys, actually, out of
Mhm.
British Columbia.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I know the first time I talked to you, you weren't sure about going to school doing that, but you were thinking about it. And I think last year when we talked, had you already started or I can't remember. Yeah.
No, last year when we talked, I hadn't started yet. This is something that I've wanted to do for
Yeah.
a very long time at this point.
Yeah.
And it was always just a matter of like, it wasn't entirely financially feasible or viable. Um, and I am lucky and fortunate enough that the church I'm working at now is helping me out with that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool to see, like, that on-ramp of, like, "I think I'm interested in this," and then, for you now to be in school and doing it, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Um, you know, like we've talked briefly about, I was in youth group with your parents. Your parents, Jonathan and Janice, had a profound and still have had a profound impact on my life. In fact, Anna, as we were talking about this upcoming interview with you, she was like, "I just was looking at your website, and when you're talking about people that have inspired you, you still have Jonathan and Janice on there."
Hmm.
And, I mean, I honestly, like, even last week when I was in Utah for a mission trip, um, it's really hard for me to even go, like, on mission anywhere and not see glimpses of what your parents sewed into us, as, students, just because I mean, I remember being 16 years old, driving through Utah, singing worship songs, and to now be leading people in that, it just your parents, just did an excellent job in youth ministry, as you are probably well aware. Um, I know that you, grew up in their home, so it's a little bit of a different perspective, but, both of them, just I can't say enough good things about them, and I think when I think of your parents too, I also think of, like, this gentleness mixed with intensity and purpose.
Hmm.
Um, just kind and gentle, but intense and focused, and you have that too. So it's an honor to get to know you as an adult, in this capacity. And anyway, Anna, you got some questions for Jason. We're glad to have you here, Jason. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the first one I have, I mean, I know a little bit of your story, but I would just like to know, like, a quick little recap of, like, how you would sum up your life up until this point.
Quick little recap of how I'd sum up the last 29 years. Um, so sorry, quick question for you. You said you were or he said you were working in ministry also. Is that right?
Yeah, um, it's a ministry that we just started at the beginning of the year, which is just worship nights that we're putting on in the valley every 3 months. We actually have one coming up this Saturday, and it's been really cool to see just how God has been bringing the community. The whole point of it is just to bring unity amongst the churches because there's just been a history of a lot of division. So it's been really cool to see how God has been doing that in our valley. So yeah.
Hmm. And I heard that you have something every 3 months, but I didn't quite hear what that something was.
Worship
So what
nights.
is
So
it
they're
coming up
worship
this
nights.
Saturday? Oh,
Worship
cool.
nights.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I like, yeah, it sounds like you know bits and pieces of my story already, but I was raised in a pastor's household. And I think you can definitely get a myriad of different reactions to that whenever you throw out a statement like that. Like, I was raised in a pastor's household, and I think often people have this like, oh no, like, are you okay, kind of reaction whenever I throw out something like that. But I was truly fortunate, to have two of the most loving and wise parents that you can ask for, and just wise in the sense of like, they were thoughtful and intentional about just about everything that they well, and they would obviously give a whole bunch of nuance to this, right? And they would obviously have a whole bunch of qualifiers, but it felt like they were thoughtful and intentional looking back on just about everything that we did in our house growing up. And the only people to say differently would be my mom or my dad, if you stick with this. Um, and so I was raised and steeped in the church, and very much had a relationship with Jesus growing up in high school, and then essentially kind of laid it to the side for the first, little bit of me going off and doing my own thing. And it wasn't like this, I don't believe. It wasn't even like a, I don't want to believe. It was truly like, I believed, and it was going to be a nuisance to me and the life I was wanting to kind of live at that point if I acknowledged that I believed. So I just kind of like didn't think about it. There was, I think I latched on to a whole bunch of like, kind of, I latched on to a whole bunch of like borderline atheistic arguments for a little bit for the first bit that I was in college, to almost, I think, just like make it easier on myself. And I look back at that time, and I don't think I really ever believed any of those. And I say borderline atheistic arguments because I was never ready to take it the full way and be like, yeah, I don't believe there's a God. I never went there. I really just laid it to the side, I think, is the best term for it. And then I genuinely felt like I kind of heard, uh, God kind of calling me out of that. I was in a specific place at the time. I was in Northern California, and it is the first time that I can look back in my life and know that I'm like, okay, I know in that moment that this urge I feel inside of me, this notion that I know and I believe and I can't get rid of inside of me to get out of here, is not from me. And that's what I felt like God was telling me. I felt like He wasn't calling me to a specific place. I just think He was telling me to get out, of the place I was currently in. And so I left. And I feel like from there, it was a progress over the next 7 years until now, and continuing, of just kind of rebuilding, my faith and building it more, exploring more, until the point where it started to mess with questions that had come up before, but mess with questions of, do I want to go into full time ministry? Um, is this something that I'm kind of feeling drawn into? Okay, I do think I am feeling drawn into that. Now, what does that look like for me to actually flesh that out? What in ministry would that be? Um, is it something that I actually want to do vocationally? Or do I want to work at a high school, which I was doing for a little bit, and do this on the side? And I loved that. And I probably would have done that for the rest of my life. But it was just a whole bunch of progressive steps, just one after the other, until I got to where I'm at now. Like, it wasn't some, like, I wasn't 20 and in college, and I didn't hear God tell me, um, Jason, you're going to go be a youth minister in Albuquerque, New Mexico. No, I was 20 and in college, and I feel like from then until now, all He's put in front of me is just like the next step. And so the next step at that time was leaving Humboldt County. And then the next step after that was just getting involved with FCA at Seattle Pacific University. And then the next step after that was going to Boise, Idaho. And then the next step after that was leaving Boise, Idaho. And then going to Albuquerque. And the next step after that was leaving, my personal training job here in Albuquerque. Loved it. Great people, great job, great lifestyle. But I, was establishing and kind of, firming up that question in my mind of if I'm called into full time ministry. And it became obvious that I wouldn't be able to explore that while doing this personal training gig, just logistically wise. So it's just been a whole number of those kind of steps, just one after the other. Um, one one option put in front of me, really.
That's awesome. I I was also a bachelor's kid, So I feel like that was the first thing that like really gravitated me towards your story. My dad was a pastor before I was born, but really most of my childhood was spent in my uncle's church. So I also have two uncles that are pastors, so that's like a whole other thing. Um, and so that was most of my childhood. So I don't really consider myself like a pastor's kid because I was under like my uncle's leadership for a while. And then when I was around 14, we started a church here in Chelan. And my dad was there for about 2 years, and then he had a stroke. And that kind of put the pause, kind of not on the church, but just like on his like leadership of it. Um, and I didn't really realize how long of a process that was going to be. I knew it was going to be a process. I just didn't realize how long it was going to be. He ended up being like his left side of his body was paralyzed, fully handicapped for almost 4 years until he passed away. So I didn't realize how long that would be. Um, and then so there, I felt like God started something with him, but it was just like never really finished. So there, I really wrestled with that a lot because I'm like, God, why did you allow him to start this but not fully finishing it out? Um, and that's why I also kind of relate to like that call to ministry because I felt like he was calling me. It's like you're stepping in on behalf of like your dad. I don't know if like you felt that with your dad, kind of like stepping in his shoes at all. So yeah, like that's one of my questions. Like, did you feel that call to ministry on your own, or did you also feel that pressure, kind of like stepping in on behalf of your dad, or like carrying on his legacy?
Hmm. It was actually something I kind of, it was something that kept me from going into ministry for a little bit. Not the fact that like, I didn't see anything wrong with his time in ministry. It was nothing like, oh, I saw how the sausage was made and now I want nothing to do with it. It wasn't anything like that. It was, it was probably like I look back at my own story stepping further in ministry and I see kind of like three moments where I kind of tabled this pull towards ministry. Because I think I'm always skeptical of myself and always skeptical of the kind of things that my brain and heart seem like they're doing at the same time. A little skeptical of my own motives. And so one of those instances was I was in my senior year of college and um, I was starting to kind of feel this pull towards ministry again. And I was kind of wondering and evaluating if this is something that I could step into. And then my dad passed my senior year of college. It was April, right before I graduated. Um, and I still really felt this pull after. Like it was something I was still really considering. I talked with a friend of mine quite a bit about it. And I, at the end of the day, was really worried that it was just like an emotional reaction, that I felt like I needed to step into my dad's shoes, honestly. I was worried that I was playing this up in my head as like fulfilling his legacy, this kind of pull towards ministry that I felt. And so I just waited. I kind of continued with the plan that I already had, which was to go to grad school for athletic training. Um, and I just tabled it because I think I was nervous that I was making a decision based off of what I thought should happen. Um, and I was worried that I would be doing it for the wrong reasons, like worried that I would be stepping into ministry for the wrong reasons. So I just kind of tabled it and waited. And I went to school. Hated the lifestyle. Loved the content of that program. Like loved what I was studying, but was looking at kind of what the rest of life would look like after that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I didn't. And around that same time, as I was making that decision, I was kind of feeling this pull again towards ministry. But again, I got nervous that I was just conjuring this up in my head as an alternative to what I thought I wanted to do. So I was like, oh, I thought I wanted to do athletic training. Now that I realize I don't, I guess I can go back and do ministry. So again, I got nervous that I was doing it for the wrong reason. Um, it wasn't until much later that I was kind of settled and I enjoyed what I was doing and I loved my community. And it felt like I was like all out of like reasons to be skeptical of myself, that I still felt that pull. And I was like, okay, now it's kind of time to figure it out. So my dad being in ministry, honestly, like it made me it made me suspicious of my own motives more than anything, because I loved him and I loved the ministry that he had, and I saw the impact he had on so many people. Um, that of course I would admire and want to emulate that a lot. But I didn't want that to be the basis and the foundation for me deciding to go into vocational ministry. I wanted the basis and the foundation for me going into vocational ministry to be that Jesus genuinely wanted that for me. Um, and to be that that was um, genuinely something that I think we're getting into God's will talk, which I know was a question for later. Um, but genuinely something that could be a option that he has set before me, and not just something that I was trying to will into existence. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, follow-up question: where are you at now with like that? Because that was like at the beginning when you first stepped into it. But like, where are you at now? Like, what's your heart posture? Like now being in it.
I mean, now it feels like I can't believe I get to do this every day. And so like there's a whole lot of rest that comes from, and a whole lot of assurance that comes from that. Like, um I read this book forever ago. It's called Whisper. I'm actually looking at it right now. Um, I can't even remember the author's name, but I can see that his last name is Batterson. So it's Whisper by someone Batterson. And he talks about the different ways that God speaks to us. And one of those that I think really stood out to me was desire. He talks a lot in this book about God speaking to us through desire. Um, like what is your heart's yearnings? And that can be, and often can be for people following Jesus, a way that he speaks to us about what's the next step for us to take. Like, yes, there's nuance to that, in that not everything we desire is God talking to us. And there's also nuance to that, in that sometimes he asks us to do things that we wouldn't have initially wanted to. But I think being in ministry now, and like just loving it, and also before I started this position that I'm in now, just wanting to, and kind of yearning to so badly, um, it gave me a lot of assurance that I was like, yeah, I think this is right. Like, because I one frustrating part about stepping into it was the number of conversations that I had with people, and they said something along the lines of, if you can do anything else, like if you feel like you can do anything else, do that instead. And I think that's bad advice. Like, I think maybe that's the right advice for somebody out there, but the advice was very much like, if you feel like you can do anything else besides ministry and be satisfied in doing that, do that. And I was like, I feel like I can do a billion things and be satisfied, because I just enjoy doing things. I was a bartender for a year and I loved it. Like, I could see a life where I just do that for my entire life and enjoy the heck out of it. I loved teaching PE at a high school. I loved it. Like, I could absolutely do that for the rest of my life. Um, that very much felt like a secular youth pastor. No fun. Um, I loved being a personal trainer. I love coaching, which I'm doing right now. And yet there was this certain amount of fulfillment and kind of burn and desire that I felt, and that I still feel when I think about doing ministry every day. Then I'm like, no, that is God talking to me through the desire that I feel in my heart for this area, for these people that I'm trying to reach, for these people that I'm trying to disciple, for evangelism. That, I think my posture towards all that now is very settled, and I think it's been that way for a while. Yeah.
Mm. I have a follow-up question, if that's okay, Anna, if I jump in here and ask. Um, I love what you said, Jason, about, God's only shown you the next step, the next step. I found the same in my own life, which sometimes can feel very frustrating and also like very reassuring, like, it's a mixture.
Mhm.
Um, when your dad passed away, was there any resentment? Did you feel like God prepared you for that? Um, because sometimes that next step, just the next step, it's like just enough for just enough provision, but sometimes there's seasons in our lives where it's like, "Lord, would you give me an extra dose of did you feel like he gave you an extra dose during that time, or was there some sense of like, "Oh, why didn't I know more?" I'm just curious about that.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'll speak only on a personal level here, because you immediately start to get into territory here where, like, it absolutely is different for everybody's experience. Um, where, like, immediately following my dad's death, I was surprised at how angry I was not,
Mm,
um, at what I didn't know. Uh, like, I like to read. I like stories, and so I feel like I'm constantly trying to avoid cliches or constantly thinking about cliches. And I feel like in that scenario, what I would have expected, or what I would have expected to be written if this was being written in a story. Not that I'm not saying it's cliche or anything like that, but what I would have expected is that this person would have been angry,
mm,
um, at a God that they are trying to follow and kind of getting their life back on track following. And then this comes right in the middle. And a God that is sovereign, and a God that is all powerful, and a God that is all good and all loving and all knowing. I would have expected somebody to be angry in that scenario. And I think different members of my family have dealt with that intermittently at different levels. Um, and I was surprised for myself how angry I was not. That there was it was easy for me to pretty quickly after, in the grieving process, not separate from the grieving process, but in the grieving process, be so, so grateful for the life that my dad lived, and so, so grateful for all the words from people, whose lives he touched in the process. um, and to feel that kind of just like, to feel this peace and sadness and joy and longing and mourning, uh, and gratefulness and gratitude, and appreciation and admiration, all at the same time, pretty immediately following his death, for the person of my dad. Um, and so I was not resentful, and I felt like it actually made it easier to just kind of cling on to the next step, because it did just feel
mm,
like I was clinging a little bit. Um, like when I was going to Boise right out of college, I was graduating from Seattle Pacific University. And it's kind of what I felt like I was doing. I felt like I was just clinging to the next step, which was, I feel like, to go to Boise and start this grad program. I just felt like that's what was in front of me. And I just felt like all I could do was kind of cling to that next step. So it didn't frustrate me that I didn't know more. If any, like kind of what you said, if anything, it was a little comforting, because I just had something to kind of just hold on to until I just kind of knew internally that God would provide the next step. And then I could just cling to that. And he did, kind of in time. Like, he did do that, and he's continued to do that. Like, he's continued to just provide me steps to cling on to, where I can just kind of sit in this present moment and not be overly anxious about what's to come. um, there's a specific psalm, actually, that's kind of become my sort of daily prayer, uh, often multiple times a day prayer. And it's Psalm 131, and it's a really short one, and it's one of the Psalms of Ascent. And it says, "My eyes are not lifted up. My heart, or I'm sorry, it says, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things that are too great or too marvelous for myself, but like a weaned child, um, I have calmed and quieted my soul.
mm,
Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore." And so it's this entire psalm that's just speaking to, I am not proud, I am not arrogant, but I am content and present. Weaned child being somebody who's been weaned off of their mother's breast milk, and instead of needing the breast milk, it is just content to be with the mother. Like it's just content to be in the presence, and it is not anxious about things that are too great or too marvelous. Um, they're just present and content with that, and it's become kind of a daily prayer for myself to humble myself, to make myself content, um, to make myself not anxious. It's this psalm that, like, as you engage with it, um, it almost works out in you the same thing that it's talking about. It almost works out in you an unanxiousness that it is talking about in the psalm.
Mm.
And it yeah, so that was a much more long-winded answer than what you were looking for. No,
No.
just kind
No,
of
it was great. It was
um,
great. Anna, do you have any feedback on that?
I just like what you said about not being angry with God. I think to my surprise, that was the same experience for me when my dad passed. Um, it's really interesting to see how like different people have different reactions, because that was my same experience. Like there's definitely people that lean um, towards that side on like other members of my family, that they're more angry that he passed. Um, but I was very surprised at how God met me and embraced me. But I wasn't necessarily mad. Like I was like at peace with what happened. So yeah, I have like a follow up question to that. What are some of the characteristics that you learned from God, like having gone through that, or some of the things that you didn't know, some sides to God?
what are some of the sorry, did you say what are some of the characteristics of God? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like that you've learned since that happened, or since your dad passed, I guess.
Mm,
That you don't think you would have experienced had he not.
Mm.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, like that's an interesting question for somebody who like grew up in Sunday school, you know, because you like learn about all these characteristics of God. But I think had you not experienced the last half of your question, had you not experienced them, I think is like the key thing, because there's a certain amount of learning the characteristics of God that can only come from experience, and that's like truly what the learning process is. And I think one of those is what I was just talking about, which is just like um, the faithfulness of God. That I think that just would have been a very abstract concept to me beforehand. Like, not a whole lot of 16-year-olds, I don't think, in the world. Not a whole lot of 16-year-olds growing up in the suburbs of Puyallup, Washington, I should say. I don't think are really contemplating or coming to grips with, on a nitty gritty level, um, the faithfulness of God, you know. Um, and I shouldn't even, I'm not going to try and generalize people's experiences like that. Never mind. But all that to say, like, you know, as a child, I knew about the faithfulness of God, but it didn't mean the same thing to me, in that I hadn't yet experienced what it would be like to depend on Him from day to day, just for like the kind of resilience to get through that day, and then see Him do it every day. Like, see Him help me in tangible ways every day, in order to just have like a little bit of resilience to get through that day. And I hadn't yet experienced as a child the fact that God would, time and time again, put one step in front of me. And if I took that step without knowing what was on the other side, I would see things kind of play themselves out in a way that I couldn't have imagined, in a ways that I couldn't have written. And in that way, God displaying His faithfulness, and His commitment to us. Um, and it didn't always even necessarily mean that it was like without pain or without trial, because there was plenty of that, and a lot of that was also self-induced. Um, but no, I think that would probably be the one that comes to mind first. would just be his faithfulness. That there is he is faithful to us, in that he does have our best interests in mind, and he will give us our daily bread, and he will, um, yeah. And even this is hard to talk about. I think because I have people in my mind who would so quickly feel the opposite. You know, um, I think there are people in my mind that I would very quickly, um, if we were talking about this, I think they might very quickly have a response to the opposite of, oh, so this God that is faithful and has this plan for you. You are telling me that that same God is the one who allowed my sister to pass last week, that kind of thing. Um, and yet, even in spite of that, my personal walk through this journey, I think, has reflected that just about more than anything else.
Yeah, it's interesting that you shared that, Jason, just because, like, one of the gals that's sharing her story this season, she's in chronic illness, um, and, talking about the faithfulness of God, it is like, when she talks about that, you stop and you pay attention because it's like how,
Mm.
you're waking up every morning in pain, doubled over, like you're, too young for like all these things in your mind. And yet it's like he provides daily for her and she's thanking him for it. It's kind of mind baffling to someone like me who's sitting there going, How can you even, you know, um, one of her questions that we talked a little bit about that I think really kind of segues well with what you've just been talking about is just like, what do we do when all we can do is respond to his faithfulness? Like, there's nothing we can do. It's just a matter of resting in that. And whether it's extreme grief or extreme, physical pain or a time of intense anxiety, there's seasons where our response to God looks nothing more than maybe a fetal position, right?
Mm.
And can you speak to that? Because I think sometimes there's a tension with like this view that to be in God's will, we've got to be doing. We've got to be like moving and, getting all these different things. And um, anyway, I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Um, no, I mean, I can relate in one sense, in that I've never been in chronic pain, externally, but I have intermittently dealt with like bouts of depression, which was something that was never really in the picture for me before. It was a development kind of later in life, and it felt like sometimes that my response to God was just in the fetal position, that it was just kind of like waking up and hanging on for another day, and it didn't feel like I was doing anything. Didn't feel like I was making a lot happen. Didn't really feel like I was, you know, expanding the kingdom, or whatever, Christianese term you want to put on there. Um, but I think something that has become increasingly clear to me over the years is that that is what like a sort of holy resilience can look like.
Mm.
Is that like resilience doesn't have to look like a traditional view of strength, um, and resilience doesn't have to look like somebody who's standing, 10 toes down, the wind kind of blasting in their face, and they're, screaming at the world. Like resilience, I think, can often look like just hanging on, no matter how little that looks like. Um, and I lost my train of thought.
That's good.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, just how do we respond when we feel that urge to like I got to do when sometimes all we can do is it's just rest. It's
Yeah,
just to yeah,
I found my train of thought. Thank you.
good.
There was something that you said, uh, the first time you asked it, which was like, do the will of the Father.
Mm.
Um, or you said something along those lines, yes.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
yeah, uh, but I was reading the other day, um, and of course, this statement could also be nuanced a billion times. But I think often we have a tendency, like in the pursuit of following Christ, and I think Christians do this all the time, that we have a tendency to make the will of the Father about something that we are doing.
Mm.
Um, where you can read what the will of the Father is explicitly, but he says the will of the Father is that we should look on the Son and have eternal life. Um, and it says that's what his will is. So the will of the Father is what he is doing and what he did in history. And the will of the Father is for us that we should look on the Son and have eternal life. And I think you would be hard pressed to really find places where it's like the will of the Father is for you to get up and do this amount today. Um, and like I said, this can be nuanced a ton of times because obviously we have the Great Commission and there's all these things where we know these are things that God would want us to do. So I am not getting rid of the goodness of doing those things and the goodness of works. But like at its very core, I think the will of the Father would start with looking on the Son and receiving eternal life, believing in who the Son is and receiving eternal life. And I think things start to get pretty screwy in a lot of different ways for a lot of different Christians when we take that message and we start turning into a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Like to look at a hurting Christian and say, get up and go do the will of the Father is exactly the wrong message for that Christian in that moment. Unless the will of the Father that you're talking about is to look on the Son and have eternal life, to look on the Son and know that that is where your rest comes from, and that is where your salvation comes from. That is where your fulfillment and your love comes from. Like for a hurting Christian, that is the right message. But a hurting Christian in chronic pain who feels like their response to God is just in the fetal position. I don't foresee Jesus coming back in the words from his mouth being something about get up and go do. You know, I just really can't see that happening.
Yeah.
There's a certain Jesus litmus test that I like to run in my brain,
How does that litmus test go? How does it go in your brain?
Do I think Jesus would say something like that? and usually I think it's a real simple test, but I think like most people would know,
Yeah.
like I think if you read the Gospels, I think it's pretty easy to run that test. Do I
Yeah.
think Jesus would come to a hurting Christian in the fetal position and say, "You just haven't done enough today.
Yeah.
You haven't trusted in me enough today." Like, do I think I don't? I really don't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I've been like ruminating on John 17:3 a lot lately, and where Jesus said, "Now this is eternal life, that they would know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." And the word "know" there, you probably know more about that word than I do, but it's gnoskos, and in the Greek it means like this intimate knowing, like
Mm,
uh, experiential knowing. It's not just an intellectual; it's like full, like knowing him. And um, when people are in a season of life where the knowing is identifying with him and his sufferings, like that's part of knowing him. And I do think that sometimes we put too much pressure on people to be, and to the credit of the church, like when we look at what the apostle Paul says in the letters, like, he talks a lot about putting on the full armor, and gives these analogies of run your race and all these different moving metaphors, athletic metaphors. But there are seasons where I just had a friend who was diagnosed with cancer. Like, you can't. And just in the can't, what I see in scripture is that in our weakness, he's stronger. And sometimes this has been my own personal perception of this, so I can't speak theologically to this, but just my own perception. Sometimes the people that are can't they're not doing anything except for trusting in God in the midst of their suffering, and I just look at them and go, "Oh my gosh." It's amazing. It's amazing to me, their faith. Yeah, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. Maybe you do, Anna, but I just feel like there's something that we miss when we focus on the doing instead of the done that Jesus has already done. And it's like, okay, oh, yeah, we're supposed to have a response to that, but sometimes the response is just looking to Him and going, I don't know what to do, but I need you. I need you. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not a question. This is just something that I wanted to say about like that specific girl that you're talking about. Because I've gotten to know them, both of them, pretty well this year, and whenever I look at them, it's really cool just to see that how much their light really shines, and even in like in the midst of their darkness, like the one that has it a little bit more worsen, like she just radiates with like the light of God and like the glory of God. And I think she doesn't even realize how much she does it. But just by the way that she lives her life, I feel like she's displaying God's glory in so many ways that she's not even aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, okay. How can the church do better in that area, Jason? You got any ideas?
Oh wow. The whole church. um
You're a good person to ask because you're an athlete, you get the metaphors, you know about the doing and the, you know, getting high
yeah.
capacity doing, but also you recognize that there's got to be a mixture of both, right? So how do you balance that?
Yeah, and I actually really am grateful for my time in athletics specifically for the understanding on this, or for the understanding that it's brought on this aspect specifically. Um, in that, I think it shouldn't be compared to athletics. um, and Paul makes those comparisons, and for a specific point, which I think it stands for perfectly well. Um, so when you're talking about like effort and striving and discipline, like yes, good, but it all needs to be taken out of the place that I think the church puts it often, which is kind of at this like foundational level.
Mm,
I think they need to take it out of there, and I think there needs to be more of an unapologetic emphasis on um, there being these very foundational truths that everyone would affirm, but that I don't think we all practically live out the same. Um, but these foundational truths of everything we're doing being underscored by something already being done for us. Um,
mm,
so, like in our lives, going and making disciples, or in our lives going and evangelizing, or those two things being one and the same, or in our lives caring for people, caring for the poor, the sick, the outcast, that none of that is a result of our own ability to just wake up and be disciplined and go do it, but all of that is unapologetically because we can't do any of it ourselves.
mm,
um, and I think everyone would affirm that, but I think the way that we go and speak to other people about some of these things, I think shows the exact opposite orientation in our hearts.
mm,
Like I think humans are never endingly pharisaical in their inclinations. Like I think
mm,
we are just constantly trying to ram ourselves back into this we can do it sort of righteousness.
mhm,
And so I think it even plays out when you're just talking when somebody receives really poor feedback from the church about the amount of faith that they do or don't have in the
mm,
midst of suffering. That if somebody is dealing with anxiety and depression and it won't go away, that it is due to a lack of faith.
mhm,
Or if somebody is dealing with chronic pain and it won't go away, or that they can't continue in the midst of it, they feel like they can't leave their house that day, that it is because of a lack of faith or a lack of trust in God. And on one hand, I do think we see this lessening in the church. And I do think we see more and more people having conversations in the church that look a little more balanced. Um, but I think, yeah, I think whenever the opposite happens and people hear that statement of, oh, you're not doing more right now because you're not on fire enough for God. I think that shows that I think it shows and implies that they believe they are doing what they are currently doing because of some merit of their own.
Mm.
Like the person who truly understands that their quote unquote work for the kingdom, the person who truly understands that that work for the kingdom is not a product of their own merit, is undoubtedly going to be more gracious for the person who is in that moment struggling to feel like they can get out of bed. And for the person who feels like their response to God that day is just curling up and weeping, um, that if your response to that person is anything but gracious, merciful, then it implies that you think you've drummed up your own drive from somewhere within you.
Mm.
And I think it implies a works based faith a little bit inherently. And again, a billion ways to nuance a billion things that I just said, Um,
Mm.
but I think the church, the big C church, the more it starts just being unapologetically gracious towards people,
Mm.
I think the better off we'll be. And I do think you see that happening often. And I think there's lots of little churches that you never see or hear about who do that often. And I think there's lots of individual people who you never see or hear of who do that often. But I think the unfortunate reality is that right now we're in an age of information, and the information that is being spread is of people who don't do that well within the church and who
Yeah.
have caused harm to people in the process of doing it. And when people needed comfort from a brother or a sister in Christ, and when people needed to be reminded of the love of Jesus, instead they were presented with condemnation or a false sense of righteousness being imposed upon them. Um, and so, how that happens, I don't know.
Mm.
Like read your Bible, read the Gospels. Like I think that would be a good place to start. You know, um, don't make the words of Paul that were based off of Jesus be more foundational than the life of Jesus.
Mm.
Um, like all of Paul's teaching, all of what he says is based off of the knowledge and the life and the ministry of Jesus.
Mhm.
And I think there's things that he says that we can have a tendency to put below that, practically speaking.
Mm.
Like they would, of course, not affirm that. They would say, no, of course I'm not doing that. But practically, how it's being worked out is that something that Paul said is being taken and made more foundational than the teaching and the life of Jesus.
Mm. It's interesting. Yeah. Like all scripture is God breathed and is useful, right? But what you're saying is
Mm.
like pay attention to the person and work of Jesus Christ. And then I I think maybe looking at the context for which Paul was talking to people about those things and why he was talking to them about we don't that's a hard different conversation, but I think so often we don't look at all that stuff. We just take things, as if they were written for us for here and now. I'm just gonna do Bible roulette and find something that ministers to me today, which I'm not saying that God can't use that. I mean, no, he's definitely used it in my life over the years, but there's something about going deeper and knowing the context that of what Paul was saying at that time for those people and how they apply and why he said those things. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is that speaking to what
Yeah,
you
a
said?
little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like not. Yeah, yeah. That is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And just not taking um not taking things which are good and wise, and not taking things which are things that we should do and making them ultimate things.
Mhm. Yeah.
um yeah. And I think that's, yeah, again, practically what we're doing when we love people poorly in the
Mm.
church.
Yeah. Yeah. You got any thoughts on that, Anna?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with everything that you said. Um, I think that's just like when the church does do it poorly. I think that's where a lot of people get turned off from the church, and that's where a lot of church hurt, quote unquote, um, gets thrown around because they didn't embrace them in the way that they needed to. So yeah, just I think my last question would be, um, how what would you say to people that have experienced church hurt, um, and they're kind of hesitant to kind of go either back to church or put themselves in a vulnerable place within the church body to because they're just scared. What would you say to people that have gone through that?
Hmm. Sorry, you know, um, and I don't even know if it would go much further past that. I think there just needs to be a recognition of fault where there needs to be a recognition of fault, and an admission of guilt where there needs to be an admission of guilt. Um, and I think I would just say sorry that happened to him. I think, like, yes, I would. I can think of a few friends in specific right now who I would love if they came to church with me tomorrow. Um, and yet, I don't think an invitation every day from me is the thing that is going to, like, I think we have this kind of romanticized idea of like I stayed faithful and I just kept inviting them every day. And there can be good to that, and that can be good at times. But it's like I stayed faithful and I invited them every day. And finally there was that one last invitation that kind of broke through the cracks, and then they came back and their life was changed again. I think that can be what we would hope would be the case. But I think if people were brutally honest with themselves, I think they would hope that might be the case, because in that story, they look like a really faithful, good, resilient Christian. Like if people were just brutally honest with themselves, and I don't want to sound like a cynic here, because I'm not. I think that's a good thing, and I think we should do that. But when I think of like these friends in specific who are in my life right now, who I would love to come back to church with me, um, what they need more is something that my senior pastor talks about a lot, which is just the gospel plus safety plus time. And there's no replaceable equation for those things in affecting change in people's lives. That is just the message of the gospel plus safety plus time. And nothing outside of a work of God can replace that time component or replace that safety component. That they just need to hear that Jesus loves them, God loves them, so much so that he came down in order to do this for them. And that in deciding to believe in Jesus and submit your life to him, you will find what true freedom is. You will find what true levity is, true light. You will find truth. So that message in an environment where they feel safe and cared for and known, and just with a ton of time. And so for the church hurt person, that environment where I think they feel safe may not automatically be in a church. And it doesn't mean that they never go back, because I think sometimes people stop a little short and they're like, this really made me realize that like I don't need church to have a relationship with Jesus, which I disagree with. I disagree with in concept, not in like not if we're arguing that statement. But and so for that, like I think people stop early and they're like, I don't need church, and that's what this experience has shown me, that I can love Jesus and I can love all the teachings of Jesus and never have to go back to church. So obviously, the hope is never that they don't come back. But it is acknowledging that for that person there might just be some time needed, and maybe it takes way longer than we think it should take. That time component could be way longer than it could take. And so yeah, sorry. you know
Yeah, I think that actually goes a long way. I think that might be what breaks a lot of chains for them.
yeah
Yeah. Yeah, an apology without expectation beyond that, just,
yeah
uh, yeah. Yeah. Jason, this has been great having you on here again. We really appreciate you taking the time. I know before we hit record, you were sharing all the stuff going on in your life right now, and we talked a little bit about it, but just really appreciate you taking the time. If people want to know more about your ministry, where can they find you?
Yeah, if you're in um, Albuquerque or anywhere close, or you're moving to Albuquerque, um, you can go on to hopechurchabq.com, and there will be some information on there. Yeah, I work with the young adults, so anyone 18 to 30, 30-ish. It's kind of a flexible boundary. But I work with the young adults, and we meet on Thursdays. So we'll be meeting tonight, actually. Um, and I work with the high school youth also. So if you're anybody in that area and you're in this area in Albuquerque, come and hit us up, or you can just even send me an email if you are one of those people who doesn't yet want to get back into a church setting, but you have a lot of questions. I'd love to chat with you. And like Janelle said, no, there is no expectation behind that. Um, it is an open invitation to chat with no expectation of conversion. So, um,
We'll
and
pray for it though.
well, oh yeah, no, I want you to be
Yeah.
converted. Yeah, I want you to be converted, but believe me, there's no expectation for this. um, yeah, but you can find that online. Um,
Awesome. Do you
yeah,
mind if we, so if anyone wants to get in touch with Jason, they can reach out to us and we'll give them your email address. Does that sound good? Or they can just find it on your church website,
yeah,
contact information on there.
yes,
Perfect.
please. That's great.
Wonderful. Final question. You've gotten this before. Finding something real is about finding restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love in relationship with Jesus Christ. Restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Which of those things stands out to you the most in your life right now, Jason, and why?
Restoration, authenticity, eternity, and love. Um, I think the one that stands out most right now would be love, because I am surrounded by a ton of high schoolers right now, some who are within the church, and some who are outside of the church at the high school that I coach at. Um, and to love them all, I've just been reflecting on, has just looked very differently, for each of them. And to love them all, it takes work, and um, love has been increasingly separated from like the feeling of being in love or feeling of being in like a just really tight relationship. It's been increasingly separated from that. Not that it can't be one and the same, but there's some hard people to love at this school that I teach at, and yet I feel this pull to do it all the same.
Mm,
Just as there can be some really easy and really hard people to love at this church that I'm at. Um, and yet I'm feeling this pull to do it all the same. So I think it's just something that God's been shooting at me a little bit recently.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Don't you just love how he shoots different things at us at different times? Like, hey, pay attention to this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anna, thank you so much for being here. Jason, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Tell your mom we said hi.
Oh,
And until next time.